Hello again. Welcome to week 11 of the diagnosis and treatment of substance use disorders. Trust you all have had a wonderful weekend. The March Madness started, so I hope that your bracket is not busted. Mine kind of is. I mean, look at all that red. That's pain. That is a painful bracket. But hopefully yours has a lot of green, and you're doing well. So this week we're going to talk about psychedelics and hallucinogens and marijuana. So it should be a fun, exciting thing. Got a big announcement to start, but I'm gonna announce it here at the beginning. No quiz this week. Big announcement. No quiz. I was going through the stuff, and I don't really think that there's enough material to warrant a quiz. So we're going to roll everything into the last quiz of the semester. It'll still be 20 questions. I won't expand the number of questions or the points available. It'll still be 20, but no quiz this week. So it'll be a discussion board, and I think it'll be good. I'm going to ask you, well, you'll find out. So the quiz number 4, which was quiz number 5, but it's now quiz number 4, they'll cover the last two sections that we're covering last week with opiates, this week with the hallucinogens, psychedelics, and marijuana. And then it'll roll in harm reduction and treatment. It'll roll in treatment options, and it'll roll in medication-assisted treatment. So that will be the last quiz of the month. Also, let me just go ahead and do a little producing here on the thing. You have a paper due at the end of April. So you have a paper due at the end of April. Don't know if you forgot about that, but now I've just reminded you. So you have that paper due, and it's kind of the big one. So make sure that you get it in. Again, what I'm going to be looking for is at the beginning, we kind of set a baseline for what you think this is, what you thought this is. Now that we're at the end of getting towards the end of the semester, be thinking about, have your opinions changed? If so, how? And then this is where we're going to have the peer-reviewed journals. So make sure you have evidence-based sources to back up what you think addiction is. And how do we treat it? What's the best course of treatment? What's the most effective course of treatment? Why do you think this? So this is kind of the culmination of everything that we have learned thus far. So if you haven't started on it, I recommend you kind of get started because it'll sneak up on you really quickly. So make sure that you do that. Okay. This week's lecture is brought to you by the letter D. I've got no jokes. I'm out of jokes. We're at the end of this semester, so the jokes have run dry. I may have a few more, but for this week, I got no jokes. So it's maybe I didn't have them to begin with, and that's more of an existential question. And you can leave your opinions to yourself, or put them at the end of the semester in your review of this class. But the letter D is sponsoring this lecture. So here's your big idea. Psychedelics are incredibly... We don't really know at all what they are. We know how they work, and we still don't have enough information to be able to really form an opinion on them from a scientific perspective. And I'll talk to you why. Cream soda for this lecture, in case you're wondering. Very good. But the psychedelics, we don't know. We're still learning about them in many ways. We're still testing them. And the odd thing is that outside of a little bit of, when we get to PCP, there isn't a major detriment to them, which is the strange thing. So it's hard for us to really form an educated opinion about what do we really think the psychedelics are, or how do we place them in this space. Okay. So, but let's talk about it. Here's some terminology to get you started. So we're going to have a few words that you probably aren't that familiar with. You've probably heard them about opiate. You know, when we talked about opiates, you'd probably heard of some of that terminology. We talked about alcohol. I mean, you probably heard of cirrhosis. You'd probably heard of encephalopathy. You'd probably heard of those. But when we get to the psychedelics, especially with LSD, acid, mescaline, and psilocybin. It's you probably haven't heard these terms before, and that's okay. That's what this class is for. It's why we're going to learn them. So, Fantastica, and these are a class of drugs that create in our mind this fantasy world. They are the things that can take us to another sort of plane of existence in another way. They are the ones that can enhance our emotions, enhance our feelings, could put us in a world where things aren't really real, if that makes sense. So the psychedelics, again, means mind viewing. Psychotomimetic. So we'll say that one more time. Psychotomimetic. Is a class of drugs that mimics psychosis. So you're taking something and we say that it's psychotomimetic, then it means that you're going to mimic some of the stuff that we would see in psychosis. So that's closer when we get to PCP. We'll talk about that, but you'll see some versions of that when we talk about the other psychedelics. Entheogen is a substance that will produce sort of a religious or overtly spiritual I don't want to say experience because that's what we, but you having this sort of like almost like I'm outside of my body connecting with the greater this sort of spirituality or religiosity that can come from taking this particular drug or this experience. And then an entactogen is one that will enhance a feeling of empathy, or like I have this sense of connectivity that I can feel what something else feels. And I'll talk about that when we talk about like MDMA and LSD. Okay, so we'll start with your indoles. So there were two different types. You've got your indoles and you've got your catechols. But we'll start with the indoles. So LSD, if you're a Beatles fan, does not stand for Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. That's a myth. They weren't on LSD when they wrote that. Or maybe they were, but they were not. But that's lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. It was synthesized in 1938, so it's been around a while. It is the most potent hallucinogen that we have. 4,000 times more potent than mescaline. And for people, they can experience the psychoactive effects of LSD with only 3 micrograms, or 0.03 0.03 milligrams, but we're going to be talking about micrograms when we get there. They're usually in 50 micrograms, which if you take the decimal there and move it over, we're going to be, so each one of these little tabs on this panda bear with guns, which is awesome, is around 50 micrograms. And so you would take those. This is what this perforated sheet is called blotter paper, and that's what LSD is put on. I'll show you crystallized LSD in just a second. But you put it on there, and you take one of those tabs, and that is you'll put it under your tongue and let it dissolve. And then after about 15 to 30 minutes after taking it, you should, people will start to feel the effects, and we'll talk about those effects in just a second. But that's what that is. So when Dr. Hoffman synthesized this, there was this idea that LSD could be used to enhance a human's understanding of their place in nature. One of the things that it has been used before, and again, we're going to come back to this thought at the end of this slide, actually. It's been used as an adjunct to therapy. So in the past, you would see your therapist, we're talking like 60s and 70s, you'd see your therapist, and then you'd also trip on LSD, which would allow you, in their mind, to sort of open your consciousness and open this whole world for you. Now, it would be supervised by your psychiatrist or your psychologist, and they would watch over everything that you would do and then talk to you about what you're experiencing in that moment as you dose. There was also a story in the book about how there was research done by exposing hundreds of soldiers and civilians without that's the wrong version, their knowledge or consent, which obviously was not what you want to be doing. And despite recent increase in research interests, current research is not conducted on LSD, and it's largely unproductive, although there is research out there. Now, here's what is happening, and it's a very small sample size, so it's hard for us to really know what is going on. But over in England, they started a small sample of people using soldiers using PTSD or using LSD to treat PTSD, to help them overcome what was going on with their PTSD symptoms. And of the 12 that utilized it, now again, this wasn't like a scientifically based with control and all this stuff. There's 12 people doing it. It worked. So then they expanded it to 100, and that worked too. And so there is a growing amount of research to suggest that, hey, maybe the psychedelics can be used to treat PTSD, depression, anxiety, some of these mental health concerns. The book talked about ayahuasca, how it could be used to help treat anxiety, help treat depression. But there's research that's actually happening. This book is just a touch old, but more. I'll put some papers in there, specifically this one, so that you can look at it. It's not, these studies are not sort of formalized studies, but there are some studies out there that are suggesting that, hey, there is some efficacy to the utilization of psychedelics to help open one's mind or open one's sense of what is consciousness, and kind of process through some of this existentialism. Many times when people trip on LSD, they'll talk about this idea of ego death, where they feel almost like their sense of who they are is dying, and they become one with death, and they actually stop fearing death. So there's some evidence out there to suggest that maybe, now it's again a small sample size over the billions of people that we have, and it's hard to generalize, but it is something to be aware of, because we could see it. Here is the pharmacology LSD. So this is actually crystallized LSD. What'll happen is they'll take this and they'll dissolve it in ethanol, and well, we'll get to that. But the LSD is colorless, odorless, tasteless. You don't even know that it's there. It just simply dissolves. It's never been linked to an overdose ever. In fact, the lethal dose, which is LD50, or the amount that creates a lethal dose, is 400 times greater than the effective dose. So it would take a lot for somebody to actually for it to be lethal. There's never been any physical dependence. Tolerance can develop in a few days if you have to take it daily or over time. And cross tolerance has been shown against all of the psychedelics and the hallucinogens. And it has its effects on our central nervous system by stimulating serotonin receptors. So again, as I said, this is crystallized LSD. You'll dissolve this in an ethanol solution, and then put it on the blotter paper, or as I mentioned, a panda bear with guns. It's awesome. All right. So what does it even do? Well, it will change your perception of reality. It distorts time, meaning 2 hours can go by in about 30 minutes, 45 minutes. It changes the perception of your body. It changes the alteration of auditory input, which is why you see people that'll go to a rock concert, or they'll go to an EDM festival, and they'll trip on acid because it will create like this experience that you can't have without the utilization of acid. Sounds become more vibrant. Lights become more pronounced. Like you see them in a different illumination. I mean, it's hard to, like, because it's all subjective, so it's hard to really put it into words. But you feel sounds at a more intense level. There's also a blending of sensory input that's called synesthesia. And it's like oh my God, I can taste the color blue. Isn't this awesome? I can see birds chirping. Like there's no birds. I know, but I can see them. I can feel I can feel trees inside. Like it's just this blending of sensory input, like this tactile things that are soft are now like the softest, most luscious thing that you've ever felt in your life. Like velvet feels like, you know, buttercream frosting. It's just the most magical thing. Um, and you almost feel, I mean, depersonalized is kind of the standard. Symptoms like depersonalization produce either an expansive, so I feel greater than or bigger than myself. I feel sort of outside of my body, almost like I'm above all of this, or very constricted, like I'm that's usually a bad trip where we're feeling inside of ourself, and like we're feeling our all of our emotions and everything on the inside. Okay. So it's again, it's all subjective, and we'll talk about the conditions in just a second. As I said, there are some beneficial uses of LSD. Oh, it's a widely held belief that it increases our creativity, but there's no evidence for that to be true. And there is a therapeutic use. It can be used in treatment of alcohol dependence, psychiatric disorders, and cluster headaches. So there is some evidence to suggest that that would help. It's not recommended to utilize any of these on while drinking alcohol because that could throw you off. I asked one of my former patients to send me some their experience with LSD, and well, there was no punctuation, and it's just a big run-on sentence, but that's okay. So I'll just read it straight here. I can talk you some crazy enlightenment I got from taking acid, and how it opened my mind, but it depends on your intention of using. I use it to find answers to become more enlightened. It's not always a great answer. Some of it is hard to live with, but I believe no such thing as a bad trip. Everything teaches you something. It's just if your intention behind using acid is to escape reality, then that's exactly what will happen. And you will get downloads that are of no use to you in this life, in this parallel. But if your intention is to connect to your higher self, then it may show you the way. Put yourself on a different timeline. It's been used to make people quit smoking. It's very, very powerful. It's just really determines on your intention, and you can't lie and bullshit to the universe about what your intention is. So you always want to make sure you have a specific idea in your mind that you want an answer to. You want to meditate on it, and you always want to make sure your higher self says, okay, now it's time. I've had shrooms and acid for months. It's not the time for me to do it. I'll know when it times. I wait for permission and I meditate on it. I usually have a shaman, we'll talk about that, with me to do subconscious healing and write it all down, even if it makes no sense. Write it down. If you can't record the messages you get from me, I get so much at one time it's hard to keep up. So that's LSD, everybody. What are your influences? Okay, so there's really 5 main influences that that we look at when people use LSD. Number 1, your mental state at the time of dropping acid. Now, this is the biggest thing because you're going to hear about good trips, you're going to hear about bad trips. So, good trips, if you are in a relaxed and calm state and you're just kind of going with the flow, okay? Going with whatever comes. These things where you're able to sort of see abstract concepts or feel this higher connection or this higher state of being is much more likely because that's the attitude that you're taking into it. Now, if you're going in depressed, anxious, nervous, dealing with trauma, trying to, you're very upset, the likelihood of you having a bad trip or experiencing things that can be very scary or very frightening is, it goes up significantly. Also, your setting. It's important. If somebody's going to use LSD, they need to have a kind of a chill sort of setting. and a setting that they are comfortable with. Otherwise, it can get away from them. The dosage is going to be significant as well. What I see sometimes is that first timers will try to do a little bit too much because they want to see all of these things, but there's no rush really to get there. The common starting dose is 50 micrograms, and then building all the way up to get this super intense experience when people will top out at around 500 micrograms. The music that is around you and the music that they are experiencing can have a huge impact on their experience. And it's also important to have a trip sitter or a shaman, as my patient mentioned, because you want someone there that kind of knows what to look for and can help somebody feel safe, right? Now, I'm not telling you guys all this to advocate for LSD use. I'm not. What I'm saying is that you may have patients, or you may be working with somebody who is using LSD and they have no desire to really quit. So how can you, as a treatment professional, ensure that they are safe? And these are the things that you can attest to. That, hey, this is harm reduction, right? We don't want to advocate. We're not enabling. We're not saying this is, hey, go do that. That'll be great. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if you plan on doing it, make sure that you have a plan to keep yourself safe. And these are the things to really look out for. Okay. Good trips versus bad trips. In a good trip, it's going to be a release of anxiety and tension, a feeling of an external connectedness or an overall connectedness. A sense of oneness with things around, and enhanced visual, auditory, or tactile stimuli. Again, you'll be able to hear sounds at a deeper, more connected level. You'll see colors are brighter and more vibrant and bolder. And then tactile, things that you touch will have, or things that you feel on your skin will have a different feel. Soft things feel like clouds, right? So it's a different thing. In a bad trip, there's this idea of ego death, or people may experience their own death, an increase in anxiety, feelings of remorse or sadness, and it can actually enhance the feelings of, if somebody's struggling with PTSD, then they may have terror or fear. They may experience some of those things again. It could trigger them to where they're unable to push through those, and it could become very frightening and can be debilitating. All right, moving on to psilocybin. So these are otherwise known as magic mushrooms. You got two different types. You got Psilocybe mexicana, which is the most well-known. That's the one there on the top. And then you've also got Psilocybe cubensis, or cubensis. And those are grown on the U.S. Gulf Coast in cow dung, which you see on the bottom. Hallucinogenic effects of psilocybin are similar to LSD, although they may be a little bit less intense. But again, it all depends on the amount that you're using, or the type that you're using. Can include intense changes in mood, perception, and thought. And it's often associated with mystical experiences, or this sort of otherworldly, I'm taking myself to another reality or another existence. It's very mystical. Okay. The influences are similar to the ones with LSD, except a lot of it is really going to depend on the range. With LSD, for the most part, the blot, when you get the blotter paper, it is what it is, right? Because it disperses evenly over the blotter paper. With mushrooms, it's really hard to know, because you can have one mushroom that can range between 1 to 12 grams of psilocybin, or psilocin, I'm sorry. So it's hard to know what you're taking. So you could take one mushroom and really not feel anything, but then get another mushroom and take it, and your world is exploding, right? So it's hard to really know. And by the way, mellow mushroom, it's great. But we all know the influence on that, right? We know, okay? We'll just keep that to ourselves, okay? So let's move on from those are the indoles. So let's go to the catechol. The first one and the most sort of well known is MDMA, aka Molly, aka ecstasy. So 1 for the money, 2 for the better green, 3, 4 methylene dioxymethamphetamine, rest in power MF Doom, all out of ale. Good song. The effects of MDMA are more like methamphetamines than your classic hallucinogens. Anecdotal reports are that MDMA produces substantially more negative or depressed mood states afterwards, but there's no evidence to suggest that. It's all anecdotal. So we'll talk. No, okay. So let's talk a little bit about MDMA. So MDMA is typically taken at raves, parties. The young kids are really into it, but it's very typical in the rave scene, and it comes in 3 different sort of stages. So when somebody takes Molly for the first time, or even over time, the first usually 45 to 60 minutes, you really don't see anything. It's not going to hit right away. What can tend to happen is people will experience a little bit of nausea, a little bit of discomfort. That's called the come up. They may feel a little anxious and a little bit almost discontented as Molly is kind of working its way in. But then once it hits, it's a very strange phenomenon that when you can go from being very anxious and thinking to all of a sudden, this is the greatest day of my life. And I feel so connected to you, to the world. Hold on. My daughter is very active right now. All right. I am just feeling this sense of oneness. Everything is, I'm just like, have you ever sat in a chair this comfortable? I feel like I'm inside of this chair. Where did those colors come from? Do you guys see those colors? Look at that. Blues and reds and yellow. Oh my gosh. That is just the best. Wow. Wow. Okay. And so it's almost this sensation enhancer that will last for usually about 2.5 hours of music. Just it hits you in a deeper place in your soul. And again, going back to similar stuff to LSD, but like lights are more vibrant and you just feel this otherworldly connectedness. Now the come down is the hard part. Which is what that third bullet point is. The come down's the hard part, because that can be this sense of sort of depression where you've had this sense of euphoria, this sort of peak, and now you're coming down from it. And there's a bit of grieving, there's a bit of remorse, there's a bit of sadness that you're no longer experiencing things as they once were, right? And again, that's all more anecdotal. Okay. PCP angel dust. So it's safer compared to the other other anesthetics, but the psychological reactions to the drug were always unpredictable. Some PCP users are violent, though that's not the norm, because most users they won't report that, and it alters a neurotransmitter system, but it doesn't act directly on them. So as I put the psychological effects, there's that euphoria, confusion, like I don't know what's kind of going on. There's some anxiety, and they forget what's going on. It will increase the heart rate. Again, it's going to be there'll be a little bit of delirium there, although that is not the common thing. It's more of just feeling the sense of confusion, anxiety, and euphoria, like all combined all at one time. We don't see PCP as much. If we're looking at hallucinogens, it's going to be LSD or MDMA, but it is important to know that it's out there. All right. So let's get to the other half of this, and that comes with marijuana, aka cannabis. So some terms: an endocannabinoid system. Now we talked about endogenous receptors. This is similar to that. So the endocannabinoid system are endogenous neurotransmitters that bind to cannabidiol or cannabidiol. I can never say it correctly that way, so I say cannabidiol, or cannabinoid receptors. And then you've also got THC, which is the psychoactive molecule of marijuana, and cannabidiol, which is the non-psychoactive molecule of marijuana. In fact, with the THC, it's actually delta 4 tetrahydrocannabinol, but we'll just say THC. Okay, all right. You got two main types of weed. You've got your sativa blends, or your sativa blends. Again, tomato, sativa, sativa. And then you've got your indica blends. And they do have a difference. Your sativa blends will be more of a head high, or you'll feel a little clearer up top, right? So it's better suited for daytime use because it can be uplifting and euphoric. You feel more alert. There's more creativity, increased energy. Again, most of your experiences on marijuana are going to be anecdotal and subjective. You've got your indica blends, which are the more body highs. You feel sort of your body kind of relax, as opposed to the sativa blends or the sativa blends where you feel the anxiety dissipate. You feel depression go away. Indica has more of an impact on bodily functions or relaxation. So it's more body high. It's better suited for nighttime use, mainly because of those sedating effects. It is indicated for pain relief, and we can see it utilized as a stress reducer. As with any plant, there are hybrids, and those offer a balance of the two blends. And it's closer, although there is closer to it being more of a body high than anything else. All right. So those are your two main types. How weed works? Well, guess what, kids? We still don't really know. But what we do know, regular neurotransmission occurs with a signal being released. So when we talked about neurotransmitters, week 4 or 5, whenever that was, when dopamine is sending a signal, or an SSRI is sending a signal into the synapse, it's usually one way. Here's the signal, the receptor site receives it, and then processes. Well, the interesting thing about the endocannabinoid system is the signal is sent, but then the receptor site will send feedback back to the sending site to regulate a message. So I hope that made sense how I explained it. So if I'm sending this message to this receptor site, I'll still send it, but the receptor site's going to give me feedback, this sending messenger, to then regulate whatever it was. Okay? So, all right. Yeah, I'll talk about all that. All right, cool. And so marijuana acts kind of like a neuromodulator. It enhances some transmitters and it restricts others. Now, what we do know about marijuana is that it does have an impact on the developing brain. The endocannabinoid receptors are more present in white matter or white brain matter, the subcortical regions of our brain that are covered in myelin, right? So again, the insulation that holds signals. And white brain matter is most present as our brain is developing up until the age of 25. So as our brain develops, because the endocannabinoid receptors are there, if I'm a teenager smoking marijuana, it's going to have a more pronounced effect on my behavior as opposed to somebody that's 42 and smoking marijuana, right? It also depends on the potency of THC and the percentage of THC that is in what I'm smoking. Because the high potency marijuana, which to be fair is all that's really out there, is far more potent than it was 40 years ago. And so if I've got a high potency marijuana that I'm buying illegally, because that's Kentucky, right? And I'm utilizing it illegally, then that higher rate of THC is that higher percentage potency is going to have a bigger impact on my functioning, Okay. We do know that it has four main parts that it attaches to. Number one is our ability to learn new information, right? Number two, it's our ability to remember old information, or our memory is messed up. Number three, it's our motivation to do things, right? And then also our ability to regulate our emotions. So those are the four areas that we know that it covers: our ability to learn, our ability to remember, our ability to do, and our ability to control our emotions. So if you think about teenagers that are, some teenagers that smoke pretty heavily. They've got poor impulse control. They have a really hard time controlling their emotions, usually anger, right? Poor motivation. I'm not doing this, right? It's hard for them in school because they can't pick up on things or remember the things that they've learned. Okay. Now, again, it's all going to be subjective. So I don't want to sit here and think that people to think that, like, oh, if a teenager smokes weed, that it's not everybody. But it is a huge risk factor to be aware of, especially if you're going to be working with kids. Okay. THC, you get the bud itself, or the actual weed, but it also comes in a number of different versions: brownies, cookies, gummies, energy drinks, hard candies, chocolates. I mean, in states where marijuana is legalized, there's a number of different formulations of it. It's not just about smoking. Sometimes people are very uncomfortable smoking marijuana or smoking anything, and so they'll utilize it in some of these other different formats. Okay, but you may be saying, okay, it's illegal here, but it's legal elsewhere, and it absolutely is. But here's the interesting thing: like, if you look at this, this is Native Roots in Colorado, the leading dispensary in Colorado. If you were to be in here, if I replaced all of this stuff with coffee, would you notice any difference? Sometimes people think that these marijuana dispensaries are like in the corner of a building, and that's not necessarily true. Again, this is Native Roots. There's several others. I've been to this one for research, kids, and it's fantastic. The people there know their stuff. They're very well educated on what marijuana is going to do. They're not going to give it to somebody that's underage. Like, they run a pretty tight ship. So there are a lot of positives, and I know that there's a big argument about should we legalize or should we not. But here is some evidence or some numbers to consider. According to the Colorado Department of Justice, ER visits once they legalized marijuana due to marijuana usage exposure increased from 803 per 100,000 to 2,696 per 100,000. So there was an increase in that. Usage in adults went from 6% to 15.5%. So marijuana use did go up. However, also according to the Colorado Department of Justice, youth rate stayed the same. Didn't change all that much. In fact, if anything, it slightly went down. And that was one of the big things that people that were against the legalization of marijuana would say, is that, oh my God, what about the kids? Think of the children, the children, the children, the children. Well, youth rate didn't really move all that much. Marijuana-related arrests decreased 56% for whites, 39% for Hispanics, 51% for African Americans. And then juvenile marijuana arrests went down 16%. Although, with a caveat, juveniles that were on probation, their marijuana usage actually did go up just slightly. But you look at, we want to take people out of being incarcerated. Well, look at these statistics. I mean, there's some evidence to suggest that. Now, again, there's a growing movement. Michigan, I think, just legalized. Illinois just did. Ohio is doing medicinal use. Now, one of the things, these are the things that you have to have in order. I think there's 20 here. These are the conditions that are eligible for a medical card to get a marijuana card. And they make it very clear. And I'll even say this here. These are not cures. Marijuana is not going to cure any of this stuff. It may ease some of it, but there are other things there as well, right? So it's not something that's being touted. Marijuana is not going to cure Tourette's. It's not going to cure chronic pain. It can help to ease some of it, but it's not a cure. It's a therapeutic in some ways. So is it addictive? Well, I mean, doesn't everything have the potential to be? I mean, protein bars, protein shakes, Zevias, right? Anything can be addictive. This stupid thing, anything can be addictive. Physiologically, I'm not going to say no, because I don't want to say no. But I'm going to say as close to no as I can get without saying no. The only reason that I'm not going all the way into no is because people are not going to go through physiological withdrawal because of their use of marijuana, even if they're smoked out 24/7. They may experience a bit of a headache. They may have a little bit of irritability and a slight cough, but that's more of, hey, I've been smoking something. But outside of that, that goes away after a couple days. Maybe not the cough, because you got to work through that, but that kind of goes away after a couple days. Psychologically, absolutely, it can be addictive, especially when people integrate it into their identity. That's kind of the most dangerous, is when they put an identity or establish an identity around being a weed smoker, right? When it becomes a part of them. So there is some psychological or some evidence, anecdotal and scientific, to show that there is a psychological withdrawal that comes from discontinuing marijuana use. I see it quite often where patients are very reluctant to discontinue marijuana because that's kind of their go-to to relax. Whenever stressors come up, that's what they go to. Again, I can't advocate for illegal activities going on. Then there's the next question: is it a gateway drug? I mean, the evidence is really still out there, right? And it's really subjective as to what you may think. So some people may think that it is. Other people may think that it isn't. So I want to be clear that I'm not going to give you a one opinion over the other is better. So just make up your own mind about whether or not marijuana is a gateway drug, and we'll just kind of leave it at that. Okay, cool. But there's CBD. That's the new hotness. It's otherwise known as cannabidiol, as we talked about. It's derived from hemp. It's not FDA approved, except for a rare form of epilepsy. And experiences will vary, and they're mostly anecdotal. And I have an anecdotal, and it's all right. Some people say it's cure-all. It's all right. I mean, people on, I'm a big golf fan. Don't know if I know that I don't look like I would enjoy golf at all, but I'm a big golfer and a big golf fan. And there are the players on the PGA Tour swear by it. I've talked to other people, oh my God, CBD is the best thing that's ever happened. Could it? I mean, I'm sure it has. I mean, there is some therapeutic effect for it. It could be just mostly psychological, or like, hey, we don't want to use weed, but we'll use CBD. But it can have some joint and pain relief. It can help people sleep. Can help people reduce some of their anxiety. But keep in mind, it is not FDA approved. Okay, so that's CBD. And I don't want to downplay it, right? I'm not saying it's terrible, but if you're interested, it's not going to show up for weed, because it's not weed. It's hemp, and it can have some therapeutic effect for people, but it's mostly anecdotal. Cool, and that's all I got. So 45 minutes, but we'll be on to week 12, and so complete your discussion board this week. As we move on, we're done with substances, except for when we get to medication-assisted treatment. We'll talk about that a little bit, but we're done with substances. We're now going to look at treatment. We're going to look at ways to diagnose. We're going to look at harm reduction. So we're going to have a few things to look at treatment-wise moving forward. So make sure, like I said, discussion board this week. Watch out for these guys, because they're out there everywhere now. And as we always say, they, Canadian geese, are definitive proof that evil exists. Live mahalo. I will see you guys next week.